In the quiet town of Maplewood, there was one story that everyone knew by heart, a tale that sent chills down the spine of anyone brave enough to listen. It was the story of Rex, the wild, untouchable dog who roamed the outskirts of the town like a phantom, a creature born of fear and legend. Rex wasn't always feared. In fact, he had once been a young puppy, abandoned at the edge of the forest by his owners. No one really knew why they left him, but the scars on his body told the story of a life filled with neglect and pain. Rex grew up alone, learning to fend for himself in a world that was both cruel and indifferent. He learned to trust no one, human or animal. If anything came too close, he would snap, teeth bared, his eyes burning with a hatred that came from years of being abandoned and betrayed. As the years passed, the stories of Rex spread throughout Maplewood. It wasn't long before the townspeople, most of whom had never even seen the dog, began to speak of him in hushed tones. Stay away from the forest, they'd warned their children. Don't go near the edge of town. Rex is out there. His reputation as an aggressive, dangerous animal grew with every new tale that was told. Tales of a dog who attacked without warning, who wouldn't hesitate to turn on anyone who dared come too close. Even the bravest of the town's men, those who had seen their fair share of wild animals, shuddered at the thought of encountering Rex. Farmers put up stronger fences, travelers took longer routes to avoid his territory, and children played inside when the sun began to set, knowing full well that Rex ruled the woods beyond the town's edge. Some townsfolk even claimed to have seen him, a giant of a dog, his coat matted and wild, eyes glowing with an eerie yellow light. The rumors said he could smell fear, that he would track down anyone who dared challenge his domain. They said that if you were unlucky enough to meet his gaze, you'd never escape. A few people had tried to tame him in the past, but none had succeeded. No one dared get close anymore. Rex had become an untouchable force, a creature that existed only in whispers. But little did they know this legend, the tale of the angry, aggressive dog, was about to change. For in the very heart of the town, there lived a young girl named Lily, and she was about to do what no one else dared. She would approach the untouchable Rex. Lily had never been one to follow the crowd. She didn't believe in the rumors, nor did she see any reason to fear something, or someone, without truly understanding them. At just 10 years old, Lily was known for her curiosity and courage. She had always been the type of child who asked questions, who explored places others avoided, and who could always be found with a book in her hand, her head lost in stories of adventure. Moving to Maplewood was supposed to be another chapter in her journey of discovery. But as soon as she arrived, there was one name on everyone's lips: Rex. On her first day in town, the other children spoke in hushed voices when the topic of Rex came up. Don't go near him, they warned, wide-eyed and serious. He's dangerous. He'll bite you, or worse. Their fear was so palpable that Lily, despite her usual defiance of such warnings, couldn't help but feel a flicker of unease. But she didn't let it bother her for long. She was used to hearing wild stories about animals from other towns. Her own curiosity had always been stronger than fear. That evening, Lily sat on the porch of the small house her family had just moved into, looking out at the dense forest that bordered the town. She could almost feel the eyes of the dog watching from the shadows, a lingering presence that seemed to have a claim on the woods. But rather than feeling afraid, Lily felt something else, a pull, a need to understand. What had turned this dog into the terror the town spoke of? What had caused him to become a legend of rage and bitterness? As the days went by, Lily couldn't stop thinking about Rex. The other children's warnings grew louder, and with each passing day, they seemed to add a new layer of fear. He's been through hell, they say, one of the girls whispered to her. Abandoned and alone, he just snapped. Now he's impossible to reach. But Lily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. She would often wander to the edge of the town, where the forest began, standing just outside Rex's territory, watching the thick trees swaying in the wind. She knew the stories, but her heart told her there had to be another side to Rex. Maybe, just maybe, the dog was more than just the sum of his scars. Maybe he wasn't the monster they all believed him to be. One afternoon, feeling the weight of her growing curiosity, Lily decided she would go see the dog herself. She wasn't going to wait any longer. Whatever the story said, Lily was determined to find out what was really true. The day Lily finally decided to approach Rex came sooner than she had anticipated. It was a crisp afternoon, the kind where the air had a bite to it, and the trees swayed in the breeze like they were whispering secrets. Lily had spent the morning playing by the creek that ran near the edge of the forest, her curiosity tugging her closer and closer to the place where Rex was said to roam. The stories told of his wrath, how he would launch at anyone who dared get too close, his growls echoing through the trees. But Lily didn't believe the stories, at least not entirely. She could see the outline of the woods ahead, dark and inviting, the trees dense enough to make a secretive, shadowed world. She felt a mix of excitement and trepidation flutter in her chest. "I'll just have a look," she whispered to herself, though she wasn't entirely sure whether she was trying to convince herself or reassure the small voice of doubt that had suddenly appeared in her mind. As she stepped closer, the air grew colder. Her boots crunched on the dry leaves that littered the ground, and the scent of pine filled her nose. The dense forest seemed quieter now, as if even the birds were holding their breath. She stopped at the very edge of the trees, peering into the thicket ahead. Her heart beat faster. Could Rex be nearby? Was he watching her right now? Without warning, the silence was broken by a low, guttural growl that came from deep within the forest. Lily froze, her breath catching in her throat. The sound was menacing, deep like a warning, but also something more. It wasn't just a sound of aggression, it was a sound of pain, of anger, of something trapped within. Her first instinct was to run, but she didn't, she couldn't. Something inside her told her to stay, to not let fear control her. Then, out of the shadows, he appeared. Rex. He was even more massive than she had imagined, his thick, matted fur blending with the dark surroundings. His eyes glinted in the fading light, amber and piercing, locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. His growl deepened as he slowly moved closer, a low rumble that vibrated through the ground beneath her feet. His body was tense, his muscles rippling beneath his fur. He was the very embodiment of wildness, of raw, untamed power. But Lily didn't back away. Instead, she stood taller, her feet planted firmly on the ground. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said quietly, her voice steady but her heart pounding. "I'm just here to see you. That's all." The growl deepened for a moment, louder now, but Rex didn't lunge. He just stared at her, his eyes filled with an unreadable mixture of distrust and something else. Something softer, something that made Lily wonder if perhaps he wasn't just a beast after all. Lily didn't move. She simply stood her ground, waiting for Rex's next move. In the days that followed, Lily returned to the edge of the forest every afternoon, always at the same time, just as the sun began to dip behind the trees. She came with no expectations, only a quiet hope that one day Rex would show himself again. It wasn't fear that drove her, but curiosity, a deep desire to understand what had shaped the dog into the legend that haunted the town. She had seen the anger in his eyes, the battle-worn scars on his fur, but she also saw something else, a kind of loneliness that mirrored her own in some ways. Each day, she sat by the trees, reading her books aloud, her voice soft and steady. She never rushed. She never tried to coax him out. She simply made her presence known, offering him a silent peace, hoping he would come to her in his own time. At first, there was nothing but silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the wind brushing against the leaves like whispers in the distance. But soon, Lily began to notice subtle changes. A rustling in the bushes, a pair of eyes watching from the shadows. She wasn't sure if it was Rex or just her imagination, but she began to feel a presence nearby. It wasn't threatening, but it was unmistakable, the heavy weight of eyes on her, a silent observer in the deepening dusk. The next day, she came earlier than usual. She brought an old blanket, spreading it out on the grass beside her. As she sat, reading a new book, her eyes wandered over the trees, half expecting to see Rex's amber eyes peering out from behind a thick trunk. But there was nothing. The forest was still. Then, just as she was about to turn the page, she heard it. A low growl, quieter than before, but unmistakable. Lily didn't flinch. Instead, she looked up, meeting the air where she knew Rex was watching. She gave him a small, quiet smile, her voice soft as she spoke. "I won't hurt you. I just want to read. You don't have to come any closer if you don't want to." There was a long pause, and then, to her surprise, the growl ceased. The trees seemed to hold their breath as the tension in the air slowly eased. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw him, a shadow moving between the trees. Slowly, cautiously, Rex stepped out into the open, his massive form hesitant, yet undeniably curious. His eyes met hers for a long moment before he turned, walking a few paces into the clearing, just out of reach. Lily didn't move. She simply continued to read, her voice steady and calm. Slowly, Rex lay down on the ground, his ears flicking as he listened to her voice, the growl long forgotten. He didn't come closer, but he didn't retreat either. It was a quiet, fragile moment, one that marked the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. Days turned into weeks, and each afternoon, Lily continued her visits to the edge of the forest. The ritual had become part of her routine, something she looked forward to with a quiet anticipation. Sometimes she would arrive to find Rex already waiting, just beyond the tree line, his glowing amber eyes trained on her, watching from the shadows. Other times, she would sit for what felt like hours, reading aloud, feeling his gaze on her without ever actually seeing him. Yet each time she came, she sensed the connection growing, slowly, imperceptibly, but unmistakably. One crisp afternoon, as Lily made her way to her usual spot, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy that made her heart race. As she approached the clearing, she heard the familiar sound of leaves rustling, but this time it was closer, much closer. She froze, her eyes scanning the woods. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. Rex, standing only a few feet away from her. His massive form was still as a statue, his eyes fixed on hers with a new intensity, a quiet curiosity that hadn't been there before. His posture was no longer tense, no longer ready to spring into action. Instead, he stood relaxed, his ears forward, as if he was waiting for something. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had expected to see him, but the reality of it was much more overwhelming than she had imagined. She didn't know what to do. What could she do? But then she remembered the way she had been with him all this time. Calm, steady, patient. She had never rushed him, never tried to force anything. And now she realized the time had come to take another small step. Slowly, she reached out her hand, extending it toward him, palm open. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, as she spoke. "It's okay, Rex. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here. I promise." For a moment, Rex didn't move. His gaze never left hers, and the quiet growl that had once punctuated every encounter remained absent. The tension between them was thick, yet something shifted in the air. Rex took a small step forward, his eyes flickering from her hand to her face, as if searching for any sign of danger. Lily held her breath. This was it. This was the moment when everything could change. Then, with a cautious movement, Rex lowered his head just enough to sniff her hand. His warm breath brushed against her skin, and Lily felt a wave of both fear and exhilaration rush through her. His nose was cold, wet, and the touch of his breath felt strangely gentle for such a powerful creature. He stepped back quickly, his muscles tense again, but Lily didn't move. She waited. She didn't need to chase after him. She had given him the space he needed. And for the first time, Rex didn't run. The air was thick with tension as the days grew colder and the first hints of winter began to creep into Maplewood. Lily had continued her visits to the forest, but this time, something felt off. The atmosphere around the woods had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but she could feel it, a kind of heaviness that made her chest tighten whenever she thought of Rex. It was as though something bad was about to happen, though she didn't know what. One afternoon, she made her usual trek to the clearing, but as she neared the trees, she felt an unsettling stillness. The birds were silent. The usual rustling of the leaves was absent. There was no sign of Rex. Her heart began to race. This wasn't like him. Rex had always been at least somewhere nearby, watching her with those amber eyes from the shadows. But today, there was nothing. She stood at the edge of the woods, her eyes scanning the trees, her body instinctively tense. Rex, she called softly, her voice carrying through the still air. Rex, where are you? There was no answer. The silence deepened, suffocating. Her gut told her that something was wrong. Without thinking, she stepped into the woods, her footsteps cautious but determined. The path she followed was familiar now, the way to the clearing ingrained in her memory. But the deeper she walked, the more the forest seemed to close in around her, as though something dark was lurking in its depths. Then she saw him. Rex was lying in the middle of a clearing, his large body unmoving. His chest rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths, and his fur, usually thick and wild, looked matted and sticky, as if he had been lying there for hours. Her heart sank as she rushed to his side, her stomach twisting in dread. His massive frame was covered in deep, raw wounds, gashes across his sides and legs, his once sleek coat now caked with dirt and blood. Rex's body trembled, his eyes wide with pain, yet when he saw Lily kneel beside him, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. Rex, what happened? Lily whispered, her voice cracking. She gently placed her hand on his fur, and for the first time, he didn't recoil. Instead, he allowed her touch, his eyes softening for just a moment. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him, and he let out a low whine of pain. Panic surged through Lily, but she forced herself to stay calm. She didn't know what had happened, whether it was another animal or something else, but she couldn't leave him like this. She couldn't leave him alone. Don't worry, Rex. I'm here, she whispered, her voice steady despite the rising fear in her chest. She carefully checked his wounds, trying to figure out the extent of his injuries. But one thing was certain. Rex needed help, and fast. Lily's heart raced as she gently cradled Rex's massive head in her lap, her fingers trembling as they lightly traced the deep gashes along his side. His body was still, save for the faint rise and fall of his chest, his eyes dulled with pain. She knew she couldn't help him alone. Not here, not in the woods. The wounds were too deep, and she wasn't equipped to treat them. But she couldn't just leave him like this. She wouldn't. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She had to think. There had to be a way to get Rex the help he needed. Lily stood, her legs shaky, but her resolve firm. She had to get back to town. She couldn't carry him, but she could at least find someone who could help, someone who might know what to do. She looked at Rex one last time, her voice a soft promise. I'll be right back, Rex. Stay here. With those words, she bolted from the clearing, running faster than she ever had before. Her boots thudded against the soft ground, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she pushed herself to the limit. Her mind raced. Who could she trust? Who would believe her that the Rex, was hurt and needed help? The townsfolk feared the dog, and even if they didn't, she wasn't sure they would act quickly enough. Then, as she neared the edge of the woods, an idea struck her like a lightning bolt. Mrs. Harris, the elderly woman who lived at the edge of town. She was a healer of sorts, a woman who had tended to animals and people alike for years. She had the skills to help Rex, and though she had always seemed distant from the rest of the town, Lily knew that Mrs. Harris had a heart big enough to help an animal in need. Without hesitation, Lily headed for Mrs. Harris's house, her heart pounding in her chest. The path was familiar, and she knew every twist and turn by heart, but today it felt different. The urgency of Rex's condition pushed her forward with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She arrived at Mrs. Harris's home out of breath, her voice frantic as she knocked on the door. The door opened slowly, revealing the kind, weathered face of Mrs. Harris. "Lily, dear, what brings you here in such a hurry?" she asked, concern already creeping into her tone. "There's a dog in the woods. It's Rex. He's hurt badly." Lily's words spilled out in a rush. "Please, you have to help him." Mrs. Harris' expression shifted from confusion to shock. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. But now, the look in Lily's eyes was enough to convince her. Without another word, Mrs. Harris grabbed her coat and followed Lily back into the woods, determined to do what she could to save the dog. The woods seemed to close in around Lily as she led Mrs. Harris to the clearing where Rex lay. Her heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't just from the running. It was the fear that Rex might not be there when they arrived, or worse, that she would find him gone. She pushed that thought away, focusing instead on getting help, on doing everything she could. When they reached the clearing, Mrs. Harris moved quickly, her eyes assessing the situation. The elderly woman knelt beside Rex, her hands moving with surprising speed as she checked the dog's injuries. Rex's head lifted slightly as Mrs. Harris touched him, and for a fleeting moment, there was a quiet recognition in his amber eyes. But the pain was still there, evident in every twitch of his muscles and every shallow breath he took. "Sure, Rex," Mrs. Harris murmured, her voice low and soothing. "We'll get you fixed up, I promise." Lily stood a few feet away, watching anxiously as Mrs. Harris worked. Her mind raced with questions. What had happened to Rex? Who or what had done this to him? Was he going to be okay? "Lily, go gather some fresh water," Mrs. Harris instructed gently, without looking up from her work. "And find some clean cloths if you can. We need to clean these wounds before we can do anything else." Lily didn't hesitate. She rushed to a nearby stream, filling her water bottle and soaking cloths in the cool water. When she returned, she knelt by Rex's side, carefully helping Mrs. Harris clean his injuries. It was slow work, and Rex flinched when the cloth touched his wounds, but he didn't growl or snap. He trusted them, just as he had trusted Lily. As the hours passed, Mrs. Harris worked steadily, her experienced hands soothing Rex's pain and dressing his wounds. Finally, when the worst of the bleeding had stopped and the injuries were cleaned and bandaged, Mrs. Harris looked up at Lily, her expression one of quiet determination. "He's strong, Lily. He's going to make it," she said softly. Lily's heart soared with relief. "He's going to be okay." "Yes," Mrs. Harris replied, her eyes meeting Lily's. "But it will take time, and Rex needs peace. He needs to know that he's safe." Lily nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Rex had trusted her, and now he was trusting Mrs. Harris. For the first time, it felt like the bond between them had truly solidified. Over the next few days, Lily visited Rex every afternoon, sitting by his side as he recovered. Mrs. Harris helped care for him, but it was Lily who remained a constant presence. With each visit, Rex grew stronger, the wounds healing as the bond between the two of them deepened. The dog who had once been feared and untouchable was now a companion, a silent protector who had found solace in Lily's unwavering kindness. The townsfolk who had once feared Rex began to take notice of his recovery, whispering among themselves. And though they still regarded him with caution, there was no mistaking the change that had come over him, or the change that had come over the town. The legend of Rex, once a tale of terror, had been rewritten in the quiet spaces between a little girl and a dog who just needed a chance to heal. And for the first time in a long while, Maplewood felt a little less fearful and a lot more hopeful.